But let's get ready for the meditation. And you can either do it with your eyes open with a bit of a soft gaze, a foot or two or three ahead of you, or you can close your eyes, whatever feels more charming for you. And let's begin. So because we're going to be a bit in our minds during our wonderful talk from Valerie, Dr. Fridland, let's do a mindfulness meditation today, but we'll do it a different type. I'm going to introduce us to a noting style of meditation. But let's first just get grounded into this present moment. So I invite you to really feel what your seat feels like, just being held by whatever you're sitting in. So funny, I try to begin each day with gratitude. And if I can't think of anything, I'll just think that I'm grateful for gravity, which is keeping me from flying up and away. So you can thank gravity as you focus on and appreciate the feeling of your seat holding you. And then just see what it feels like. I've just started doing this, but it feels really nice because it really brings you into your body to just tap your fingers one by one to your thumb. It's a little bit of a playful beginning to the meditation. A really nice way to get out of our minds and just into our bodies. You know, more and more as people teach us about decision making, they'll often say that the wisdom that our bodies have is actually even greater than the wisdom in our minds, because our body holds the wisdom of all of the experience that our life has brought to us. And so throughout our days, the more we can be in our bodies, kind of the more ease we have with our days, the more ease we have even with decision making. But no decisions to make right now, except for the decision to really relax into mindfulness. And so for just a few breaths, just find the feeling and the sensations of your breath. Just notice what the inhale feels like. Each of us in this moment can have such a deep appreciation for the natural functioning of our bodies. We're so fortunate that the breath just comes just naturally, with really no effort from us right here, right now. And then just feel and layer on a bit of an appreciation for how beautiful the flow of the exhale is and how relaxed that is. And with each exhale right now, just think about relaxing the muscles in your forehead and your shoulders. Many people hold tension in their jaws. So just think about relaxing the muscles around your jaw. And anytime your mind wanders, that's fine. Just choose to bring your attention very gently back to the sensations of the breath. Every exhale is just a chance to relax any tightened muscles in the body at all. I hold my tightness in my stomach, so you can think about relaxing all of the muscles around your stomach or in your legs. Wherever you feel like you could benefit from a bit of relaxation, let yourself enjoy that and benefit from it. And now today we're going to practice a different style of meditation than the ones I've guided in the past. I want to introduce you to a noting style of meditation. It's possible you've done this before, and if not, I'll explain it. You just want to note to yourself, just label whatever's most present for you every few seconds. So it might be if you're hearing cars go by or people next door or near you, might be hearing. But then if you notice yourself thinking about a meal coming up or anything you need to do later, or a conversation you're going to have in a few hours, you can just label that thinking or even planning. And then if you notice perhaps your hands maybe being warm, I know for those of you on the East Coast, especially in New York, it's been very warm. So if you notice your hands being warm, you can label that either warmth or even sensation. Just that the most present thing for you in this moment is the feeling of a sensation. You might feel connected to all of us on this beautiful call together, or you might feel lonely as the months of the quarantine roll along. You might feel relaxed or angry, anxious or happy. So whatever is most present for you, just place a name on it and then let that go and see what comes up for you a few seconds later. You could even be mindful of the feeling of sitting, so that might be pressure or sensation. You don't have to do this in rapid fire, but keep up with it, I'd say every 2 to 3 seconds. In one period, it might be don't know, that's okay too. Or it might be the same sensation or pressure a few times in a row. But see if you notice that once you label something like thinking or planning or even anxious, sometimes that goes away. But just notice what comes up for you. And it really can change. So you might feel relaxed, relaxed, anxious, happy, connected, pressure, hearing, hearing. Just notice exactly in this second what is for you right now. You might find if you've been busy planning something in your mind that if you just label it planning, that it might just stop. And then you go into your body again and notice sensation. Or maybe not, whatever you're noticing, you just want to be honest with it and just label it and then see what comes up next. And when you're ready, you can stretch your arms up. You can stretch your legs out if that feels nice. And if your eyes have been closed, I will invite you to open your eyes up. And we'll do a chat about how that went after Valerie blesses us with some linguistic wisdom. But if you feel inclined, you can put some notes in the chat. It's funny, I just started practicing this type of meditation. I did it this morning, and it was really profound for me because I was noticing planning. But then when I labeled it, it just stopped. And I found it really helped me to be more present with my day and just appreciate beauty around me, even in a tree or a leaf or a flower. But I'm curious what your experience was with noting. There are many people who really like this. And a few years ago in the venture capital and entrepreneurial world, it was huge. It was the very kind of fashionable meditation to do. But I'm curious whether you've done it before or not. If you loved it, hated it, it's all good. There are many styles of meditation that appeal to different people. I'd love to hear what you thought of it, how you liked it. But next, before we chat about that, I want to say a huge thank you to our guest, Valerie Fridland. We are so honored, I should say Dr. Valerie Fridland, who we're so honored to have speak with us, but this is going to be pretty fun too. She's a professor of sociolinguistics at the University of Nevada in Reno. She's an expert on the relationship between language and society, and her work has appeared in many academic journals. She's also co-author of the book Sociophonetics, that is a mouthful, coming soon from Cambridge University Press, and she just sold another book. Woohoo! I don't know if she's allowed to talk about it, but sorry that I just scooped that. I hope that's okay to say. You can talk about that. Okay. She also writes for Psychology Today, lectures for the Great Courses, and is working on her first book for a popular audience. That's a book that she just sold. Oh, good. Okay. It's called It's All Talk, How Verbal Tics Shape Who We Are and Who We Want to Be, with Viking Penguin, which is an awesome publisher. So it's relevant for today because the words in our language helps us identify who we are. So I'm excited to hear about that. In her spare time, she consults in forensic linguistics, analyzing the language of legal statutes and wiretap transcripts. Oh my God, in my spare time, I take walks. I don't know what that means. Most importantly, she's the mother of 2 great kids, though she writes that quarantining with them for COVID has sometimes changed the descriptive adjective of choice. She's a good writer. Over to you, Valerie. So excited to have you with us and can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm a little disappointed that your mom decided not to come. I think if I could probably retire happy if I could convince your mom that was actually positive.
No, we had a big talk last night, and she said, I am not going to come because I do not want to cause an argument.
Well, at least she won't be here to heckle me. So I guess that's a positive thing. I'll let you relay the message though when we're done. All right, well, I'm going to jump right in because I think this is a fun topic. Now, my specialty is actually not verbal tics, although I'm a sociolinguist, which means I study language and society. So it's part of the types of things that we do study, but I actually specialize in vowel movements. And I want to make sure you understood that was with a V, because sometimes it's misunderstood, and I'm not that kind of doctor. I can do nothing for you in that world. But what's really funny is when I give talks on vowels, which actually are more fascinating than you would think, people are always excited to hear about the vowels, but then they follow me to my car and they say, okay, the vowels are cool, but why does everybody say like so much? It drives me crazy. I think that's the number one verbal tic I hear complaints about. And Dina and I have actually talked at length about this verbal tic. And what I want to try to persuade you of today is that actually like, and many other of the fillers that we dislike, now you're going to see how many times I say like in this talk, are actually just signs of linguistic evolution and not decay. And the reason we believe that they are decay has to do with the types of speakers that use them and our beliefs about those speakers. So I'm going to unpack all that for you. But before we get to that, I want to spend a little time telling you what like is and what it isn't. So like is a very amorphous word. As I say in my class, it's a very promiscuous word. It tries to do all things to all people. And so it is everywhere, and it feels sometimes like it's random and chaotic. So when you hear someone using a lot of like, sometimes it feels like, see, just like that, a lot of likes are scattered everywhere in their speech. But the problem is, usually we don't recognize the different functionality of like and recognize that there are actually quite a few different likes floating around. And all of them have logic and patterning, but when they occur in the same place, similar to each other in terms of one sentence, we get them confused and we think they're all doing the same thing. So let's unpack like just a little bit, and then we'll get to why we don't like. And then I'll convince you that you should. So let's think of like in the traditional ways we use it. So this would be something like a verb, I like ice cream, or a noun of my likes are ice cream, or maybe a preposition, ice cream is like nirvana. Are you getting a subtle sense of how I feel about ice cream? And if you're wondering, salted caramel. So if ever we go out for ice cream, that's the one. All right, so those are all likes that are traditional in use. And those are very old forms of like in our language. They started around the 12th century. We had a verb, likian, that actually was used regularly in Old English. And then around the 14th century, it evolved to have some other uses like the preposition and noun uses. And then we get to modern times when we have likes that don't seem to fit that pattern. So let's look at those likes and see if we can distinguish them from one another, because there's actually a bunch of likes and we get them all mixed up, but they do very, very different things, and they do some really solid work for us. So let's put aside the traditional uses and focus on non-traditional uses. So one non-traditional use of like would be something of the type, I'm going to try not to say like too many times, like I really like ice cream, or I really like ice cream. Okay, not my native style, but you get my drift. And that is like as a discourse marker. So discourse markers are things that all languages have and all speakers use. There are a lot of very traditional ones that have been in the language for quite a while, something like well, which you can see in a lot of literature from the 16th and 17th century. But we also get new evolving ones. So things like you know is another example, or by the way, or I mean, or actually, or so, or okay, or right. All of those are discourse markers. And discourse markers serve a number of different really important social greasing types of functions. Now, they don't necessarily contribute to the literal meaning of what you're saying, but they give a lot of information about what the speaker intends with what they say and how the listener should take that. And we do a lot every day in our language that isn't strictly information. How many times do you ask someone how they are during the day? You don't do that because you really care. Most of the times you could care less, but you do that because it's a social nicety, because you're trying to sort of grease the conversational wheel, so to speak. And discourse markers really fundamentally do this, but they also manage conversations. They help different parts of our conversations cohere. And they also tell listeners what to focus on. And like does all of those things. And so there's not just one like as a discourse marker, there's actually a couple of different likes functioning as a discourse marker, and their purposes are quite different. So it's important to look at how they each function. So let's take the one that's sentence initial. So something like I like ice cream. That one serves to cohere what I just said with whatever was said before. So a lot of times you'd say it in a stream of speech where you had said something else about this ice cream parlor. And then you might say, like, I really like ice cream, but blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of showing, look, I'm relating to what we just said, but I'm moving to something different. That's called a linguistic focuser. And it also is similar to something like so, or by the way, or I mean, where we're trying to draw attention to how what we're saying relates to what we said before and focus attention on something I'm about to say. So it's an attention getter. And we've used discourse markers in this way back to the 10th, 11th, and 12th century. In fact, you can see in Beowulf, a discourse marker begins the entire epic poem. at that time, of course, it wasn't like, it was what, which was an attention getter saying, hey, listen to me, this is going to be important. So if you look at it that way, like is actually a very traditional way of getting attention. It's just a new word that we're framing it with. When we put it pre-phrasal, so not at the beginning of a sentence, but before a phrase, something akin to, I really like ice cream. Again, not my native variety, so it's a little hard for me to do it. Or how about this one? I like dig linguistics. That's a good one. Then what we're trying to do is highlight that phrase. So again, that's in a linguistic focuser role where it's saying, okay, this is what I want you to focus on in terms of what I'm about to say. So it's drawing the listener attention to what I'm trying to highlight. So those are both very important uses of one type of discourse marker like. Now, let's go to a completely different type of use, which would be the approximating adverbial. Doesn't that make like sound so much more sexy than a discourse marker? So an approximating adverbial is something similar to about, and that would be when I'm trying to estimate or hedge on giving an exact count of something. So a lot of times we have conversations about things that we want to express some idea about how far we were, how old they were, how happy we are, some amount of something, but we may not want to give an exact amount. We may not know an exact amount, or the exact amount might be irrelevant to what we're actually trying to say. So perhaps I saw a bear, which I live near Tahoe, so it happens frequently. And I want to explain that the bear was actually quite close to me, but I didn't take out my yardstick and measure because I was screaming about the bear. I might say, oh yeah, the bear was like 5 feet away, where I'm giving you an estimate of how far the bear was, but I don't know for sure, so I don't want to claim it was exactly 5 feet. Typically, in traditional uses, we would have used about in that context. So you'd say the bear was about 5 feet away. Like is a one-to-one correlation in that situation to where we put an about. The main difference between a like that's an adverbial approximator and using about is age. So what we find is speakers over the age of 40 would tend to use about in that context. Speakers under the age of 40 tend to use like. So it's not that it's doing anything different than something all of us already use. It's just a new form to do it with. So those are two of the types of discourse marker likes. There are a few others, but those are the main categories. And what I really wanted to get across there was not that you need to know all the categories of like. I can certainly give you a few academic papers that you can read if you like that, but just that they are truly functional and they are serving a purpose for us. And the reason that we have them is they've evolved to serve some deficits that we felt we had as speakers in terms of how we communicate and what points I want to get across. So let's switch though to no more discourse marker likes and a completely different type of like, which happens to be the most widely hated like in the English language. That is quotative like. So we talk a lot about what other people say or what we think about events or stories, or we quote other people a lot. Typically in traditional contexts, we'd use the verb to say. So I said, no, I don't really feel like going. And he said, well, I think we should. Nothing unusual about that, very conventional. But we sometimes want to put a little different spin on our quotatives. And so we have evolved a couple different types of quotative verbs. So like is not the only one. For example, if I'm being a little more casual, and speakers pretty much at all levels do this, I might say, well, he goes, he didn't want to go. And I went, I really do. So we use the verb to go as a quotative. And if you're Californian and young, you might even use I'm all and he's all, which is a much more colloquial form of a quotative. So there is a history of a variety of quotatives coming into the language because they obviously express something different than say does, which is fairly formal, traditional, and often tied to more of a written or formal standard English use. So be like, because it always occurs with the verb to be in this context, is simply another member of this quotative class. The bigger question might be, well, if we have these other forms and we have to say, why do we need be like? What is the purpose of having this be like? Why do we even need to be like anything? Well, there are a couple really interesting studies that have looked at the rise of be like, which is the fastest growing use of like in all world Englishes. So this is not just affecting American English. We find it in Canadian English, Australian English, New Zealand English, British English, and Scottish English. Pretty much everywhere English is spoken, like is soon to follow. And quotative like in particular has grown at an exponential rate. In a study that looked at the growth of be like in a 10-year period, grew at a rate of 50%. So pretty exponential growth, which suggests it's not going to stop. In fact, the authors of that study likened it to what's called a black swan event, something unusual and sort of altering the course of the future. So why is Be Like so popular if it's simply just a colloquial form? Well, because it actually seems to be doing something very, very special that no other quotative does. So if you think about the verb to say, and when we talk about quoted dialogue or what other people have said, it's usually with a third person subject. Now, a third person subject is something like he said, she said, they said, maybe it said, if you're talking about aliens or Martians, who knows, right? It's always with the third person subject. And if you look at corpora studies, meaning they take a bunch of spontaneous speech corpuses and they examine them over a period of time, what emerges is that say almost exclusively occurs with third person subjects. Now, if you do the same thing with be like, what you notice is it doesn't occur very often with third person subjects. It does some, actually that's grown in the last 20 years, but in the early corpora that they looked at, it almost exclusively occurred with first person subjects. A first person subject is I or we. So right away, we see something that in linguistics usually signals that something is going on, and that's called complementary distribution. And that's the idea where one form occurs, another never does, or they're doing two different things. And that means that there was a void that needed to be filled, that the thing that has arisen to take place in the context the other one never does is trying to fill. So what is that void? Why would it be that be like is used in first person subjects, but not in third person, and vice versa with say? Well, it seems to correlate with the shift in the narrative style that started to come about in the latter half of the 20th century. And that is a more monologic performance of the retelling of stories and events. So prior to the 1950s and 60s, when we talked about stories or relate events, we did it just with direct quotes. We stated the facts. We didn't put our own spin on them. But in the latter half of the 20th century, what has become more typical is the heightening of dramatic tension using both historical present tense verbs and be like, that seems to allow you to put your own internal thoughts or your own dialogue or your own spin on the telling of events. In other words, we're performing the events as we tell them. And this is a big shift that didn't happen in the last 50 years prior. And it has seemed to trigger the need for a new verb in our quotative class of verbs to allow us to express first person subject thoughts like this. So not only is it novel, innovative, and creative, but it's also useful. So those are the three top like usages that I'm going to tell you about tonight. What I want to talk about a little bit is why we dislike them so much, because there are a lot of new forms that come into language and we don't tend to sort of treat them with the kind of horror that we do with like. If
Yeah,
you
that's
just Google like,
yeah. Why does it drive us so bananas to hear it?
Well, that's sort of the interesting question, and it has to do more with the speakers that use it than what it does in terms of function, because clearly it does serve a function. But who do we associate most with like users?
Definitely young people, maybe from California.
Okay, someone says immature, young people. All right, anybody else? Who else? What else do we think of? If you picture someone using like, what do they look like? Anybody?
Shelby, she doesn't want me to say something. Shelby tells me about this. She says that oftentimes it's like a valley girl kind of stereotype, especially California. I think she's told me like blondes, people that are younger, they kind of like, it's a stereotype.
Can
So.
anybody tell me how many times he said like? Right.
Steven says like a lot as well. I'm guilty as charged.
So yes, we have this sort of image of younger teen girls that use like a lot. In general, we don't tend to think young teen girls have a lot to say. Actually, we often don't think women have a lot to say. This is a very long history going back to Plato and Aristotle that demeans the contributions of women, especially in public forums of talk. So what we see is a combination between the fact that typically innovative patterns occur with younger speakers. So language change is always in the mouths of the young. We rarely have 80-year-olds that are innovating in language. And women are also at the forefront of linguistic change. Almost every major linguistic change that has entered the English language has been led by women. Now, what happens is gradually men catch up, and then it becomes the norm rather than the exception, and it's not noticeable. But at the start of most linguistic changes, it is young speakers and young women in particular in the lead. So that seems to be partially what's happening with like. It is predominantly younger speakers that use it. That is very well attested in almost every research study. And it is slightly led by women. Now, if you look at the earlier literature, you would find a bigger pattern of a female lead, but now men seem to be catching up. A lot of this seems to have to do with transmission between mother and children, and also the normalizing of the use of like as it spreads.
Wait, I have to
Those
say,
speakers,
we're technically in the Q&A, so Bella,
okay.
finish your sentence. If you guys put
finish my sentence, and then we'll get to questions. So what happens basically is as the new changes are coming into a language, it's led by younger speakers and women. If people have any negative reactions to it at the onset of change, those tend to get targeted towards women and young speakers. Blame the women and children, because those are the speakers for whom it's most accelerated. After it normalizes, no one notices it. All right, I'm going to end there so you can ask some questions.
That was awesome. I know that Stephen has a question. I can see it. I can feel it. Do you have a question for us, Stephen? No, is he unmuting himself?
Yeah, I am. I'm unmuting myself. Not yet, but I will have some. You betcha.
Okay, don't be shy. Does anyone have a question? You're welcome to put it in the chat, or you can ask it directly. I have a question that I'm gonna wait to ask. We have about 2 minutes because it's not unlike. But I will say I was taking a hike yesterday doing my new noting meditation, and the girls in front of me were saying, oh my God, he said, like, I can't even tell you, like, it was unbelievable. It was every other word, and I thought I was gonna absolutely lose it. And then I remember that you were giving this talk, so I was trying to just be mindful of it and note it, but it was definitely driving me crazy.
Once you can't unhear like. Once it starts, it's hard to stop.
Definitely. Well, if anyone has questions, feel free to ask them. I'll go off topic, but since you're a professor and linguist, I'll ask you, is concerning a word? Is that a word?
As in, it was concerning what he
Yes.
said? Yes. You know,
Oh,
I'll give you the true linguistic answer. Linguists are descriptivists, not prescriptivists, which means that if you use it as a word, it is a word. That's how novel forms are invented in language, right? So you can make up any word. The only problem is you'd have to convince hundreds of other people to use it. But certainly concerning is a word. Now, irregardless is one that gets people really upset, but I would make the claim that whether or not you like that term, it is a word. It may not be a word you like or a standard word, but it exists as a word.
No, it was just made in a word officially, I think, in the last few weeks.
Yes, I think it was. It was. And that actually dates back to the 17th century. So we can't claim that's a new one either.
Oh, I thought that was new.
You know, there's something called recentism, where every time we hear something that sounds new to us, we think, wow, it's so new. But actually, if you look back in the records, and the Oxford English Dictionary is fascinating. It has almost every word you could possibly imagine, and it will tell you the history of when it was first discovered in any kind of documents. And there was recently a chat in a linguist circle, yes, that's what we linguists do late at night, about when it first occurred, and it was in the 17th century. We find some written documents with irregardless.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'll tell you that I started my career working at MTV News, and I was in the exciting job of transcribing interviews by hip hop stars. And there was a lot of, you know what I'm saying, like every third word. I wonder do you know where that comes from?
I don't offhand, although I could do some research and report back.
I thought that was interesting. I wanted to, after about half an hour of transcribing this, I wanted to say, yes, I know what you're saying, or no, I don't know what you're saying.
I got it.
But it's interesting to hear. I guess you're right. The like, oh, looks like we have a young one who might have some questions in the room here. Anyway, hi.
Oh yeah, look at that. A future like user.
Shelby and Stephen, keep like away from him. No, it is helpful, Valerie, to know that the likes and the ums and the you knows and you know what I'm saying does not mark the end of civilization. And so to have someone as thoughtful and educated and eloquent as you are explaining that makes me feel better about the status of America, if not
well,
COVID testing here.
actually, just very quickly, the fascinating thing about and is not only are they not negative, there's some really interesting research on the benefit to listener comprehension that they do from reaction time studies in EEG. Recall of unfamiliar words, for example, or novel shapes is much faster if when in the testing environment an or an preceded the prompt. So what we find is people actually do better in performance if you say on or before whatever it is you're talking about. So that seems to be a linguistic cue for them to spend time focusing and processing on what you next say. So actually and is not only not negative, it's very helpful. And we have the EEG proof of it.
I have a few questions now.
All right, hit me with them, Stephen.
She knew. So the thing that you just say right now about and really reminds me of, I do a lot of, I'm like our human resources director, point person at the Life Change Center. It's a nonprofit here in Reno. I do a lot of our interviews, and I love when people ask me if they can take a moment or they just pause prior to answering a question in an interview. There goes the And I believe that the is sort of like indicative of a pause that they're taking to think about what they say before they say it. Our executive director has even said that he appreciates when someone answers a question, especially if it could be posed as a yes or no question, and they say yes, and then they kind of take a pause and then continue into their answer, or they say no and then they pause and then they continue into their answer. And so it seems like the functionality of or is sort of just to fill space in order to gather your thoughts to be able to answer articulately or more thoughtfully, you know?
Well, there is a lot of evidence that, in fact, they do function that way. And the interesting thing is that signals something different in terms of pause length than It does seem to occur at complex cognitive processing junctures. So whenever you have to make a decision about what kind of phrase you're going to use, or lexical items that are difficult, we find that it correlates with an increase in and prior to that, which seems to signal processing efforts. So it does work, and that's called the symptom view, where it's the symptom of your thinking about what you're going to say. But what we also find is it seems to signal things to the listener. So that's maybe the speaker's purpose, but to the listener, it signals how long a speech delay to expect. So signals a longer speech delay, and signals a shorter speech delay. And if you actually study it, you'll find that's exactly how it distributes. Occurs prior to longer delays, occurs prior to shorter delays. So it seems to be a signal to the listener whether they should go get a sandwich or not while you're talking. The is going to be a long wait. The you better stay around.
That's so funny.
You guys, we have to go to breakout rooms, but we'll come back. We'll come back. That was a great question, Stephen. Stephen, save them. Valerie, if you're able to stay through the breakout rooms, Dan Brooke has a question as well. We just want to make sure we get to the breakout rooms. If you're able to, and then we'll get back and we'll get to more questions from Stephen too. So we are back. Valerie, I will ask you the question that Dan Brooke had asked, which is whether like is useful for paraphrasing.
Well, I think that's tied up with the idea of approximating. So you're kind of summarizing some larger thing you might want to say, where you're going to say, okay, well, the bear wasn't that close and he wasn't that far, where you're just basically saying, okay, I'm approximating. But beyond that, I'm not sure it's ever been, used as a paraphrasing marker. But I think that's sort of the same sense.
I think I meant, like, when you were talking about quotatives, I think, like, when people say,
oh, yes.
I was like, they're not saying exactly what they said. She was like, so, something.
Rather than paraphrasing, that would be an indirect quote, where it's not exact. You're kind of summarizing. This is the gist. But yes, that's exactly what it's for. So it's either internal dialogue or indirect speech. So that would be roughly equivalent. So yes, absolutely, that's what it's used for.
Love that. Yeah, that's a good question. Stephanie, can you put in, so Valerie, I want to say that you were great. I think we might have lost Stephen and Shelby in there, but I know they had more questions, but they loved the talk. So thank you so much. Steph, can you put in the chat? I do want to thank, we're partnering with a company that people in our community have started. We're not paid for this. I just want to support them. They do these eco-friendly laundry pods, so you can use them in your laundry machine, and it's sustainable and non-toxic and all of that. So I want to make sure we put that in the chat. And I want to, ask Valerie, sorry. Oh my God, how can we support you? That's what I wanted to ask.
Well, I have a couple of different places where if you want to learn more, I'm a professor, so it's my job to just educate. So I would love to talk further. So if you ever have questions, you're welcome to email me. I also write for Psychology Today. My column there is called Language in the Wild. So I think they're going to give you that link if you ever want to go read some of my articles. And then I do have my new book that will be coming out. I'm still writing it though, so it's a bit off. I'll make sure that Dina has that information when it comes out. I have another book coming out, although it probably would put you to sleep and you may not want to read it. But if you're interested in sociophonetics, it has some scintillating parts. So that's coming out next year with Cambridge University Press. I also have a great courses series that is oriented towards non-linguists called Language and Society. So I think they'll link to that as well. Or if you're just interested in learning about my research, I have a research website that will just explain the types of research that linguists do and that I'm doing personally. And I put in the comments a beautiful song that my daughter wrote and sang in case anybody's interested in listening to some great vocals.
Oh my God, that's so cool. Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah, Valerie, we'll send all of the materials to everyone who's with us, so you can all check out the courses and all of these other ways. Oh, by the way, I did want to say that, it's mindfulness to notice your language. That's the connection, if that wasn't clear. So when you're speaking, it's just interesting to know what's coming out of your mouth, the ums, the likes, and the brilliant things, and everything in between. So that's part of mindfulness. So Valerie, you are just a delight. It's so, during this time, it's so easy to think our brains are turning to mush. So with your intellectualism and thoughtfulness and your ability to analyze and teach us about how we're using language and what that shows about us and about our society, I just found really, really inspiring and very intellectually stimulating, which we all really need right now. So I just want to thank you for your time, your research, your energy, your 2 new books coming out. Huge congrats on a big sale of your book recently.
Thank you.
To a mainstream press.
That reminds me, sorry, if you are interested in more, I do have some podcasts too that you can link to if you just want to learn more about language and language change with women and children. So that would be
awesome. Okay. Yeah, that's perfect.